Chapter 12.
We need to learn a little bit about oils and remind ourselves of the structures and why it is that we need to incorporate oils into our diet. I'm going to come over here, Gary, so I can see everybody. You can film from wherever you want now. Okay, so what we want to know is how to optimize neuronal membranes. And the reason I put this in as a subject is because when we assessed people's regeneration and degeneration, we found that it was the oils that made the principal difference. And we know that the way the body uses unsaturated oils, it doesn't usually use them for energy. It uses saturates for energy. It uses them for making phospholipid structures within the membranes. And every cell in the body has these membranes around the cell and around the nucleus and around the mitochondria and the other organelles. But the neuronal system, the brain, central nervous system, is very interesting because it's a little different from other cell structures. So we know that oils or lipids are classified as very simple ones, known as oils and fats. They're called fats if they're solid and oils if they're liquid. And there's complex lipids which are made of phospholipid structures, those with phosphate groups, glycosphingolipid containing fatty acids and carbohydrates, and lipoproteins which contain proteins. We know that an oil can be defined as saturated, which means it's got no double bonds. Okay? So it's a continuous carbon chain from the methyl end on the left to the carboxyl group on the right. So it's a chain. It could be 30, 40 carbons long, or it could be just as simple as saturated one would be 1 carbon long. That's called formic acid. You know, that's the bee sting one, isn't it? Or the wasp, I can never remember which one it is. Bees, I think, is the formic acid. And then you get 2 carbons in the chain, and that's called acetic acid or vinegar, and so on. So vinegar is a fatty acid, but it's a short-chain liquid solvent one. And we get unsaturated double oils, which mean we've got a double bond. So where we've got a carbon to carbon, we've got a double bond between the carbons. So this means that that double bond could open up and take on something else. And if that double bond takes on an oxygen in that position, we then have become oxidized, or basically the oil goes rancid. Okay? And the rancid oils are really quite a much bigger problem than even probably trans fats. So trans fats, as we'll see, twist the molecule, but oxidized actually make the cell membrane much less permeable to diffusion. And that's really what the aging process is about, that basically we're going rancid. And the only way to solve that rancidity is to replace the oils with good oils, the which ones you need, and to make sure that the phospholipase enzyme, which cleaves out the old phospholipid, the old oils, is working all right. Is that okay? So there we got formic, yeah, it's bee stings, acetic acid, propionic, butyric and valeric. These are saturated fatty acids in the rumen of, or in the gut of ruminants. Caproic, and then we start going up to the more familiar ones. Caprylic at carbon 8, capric at carbon 10, undecanoic at 11, lauric at 12, myristic 14, palmitic, which is the soft fat which makes people cuddly, nice and cuddly, is carbon 16. And then we get stearic acid, which is a more solid one, which is candle wax, basically. Arachidic, which is a really hard fat. And bohenic, which is probably those that are the real lumpy fat of lipomas. And lignoceric, which is present in the brain somewhat. And as they go up to longer chain ones that the body uses or incorporates, the melting point goes up. Okay, so they become more and more solid. Okay. So those that are lower down are liquid at body temperature, and then it changes around the undecanoic carbon 11, which is present in castor bean oil. It changes from being liquid into solid. So lauric and myristic are solid oils, and palmitic, as I say, is the solid. And this is the tripalmitates and stearics of what the body usually stores as a triglyceride. So when we store fat, we store saturates. And the saturate mainly is usually 2 molecules of palmitic and 1 molecule stearic, but it can be any combination of those. So that's what a triglyceride is. So here on the left, we see an unsaturated fatty acid with a double bond. We see the carbon-carbon here. And we see the normal configuration of this is that there's a kink in the structure. In other words, there's an angle here of 120 degrees, so there's a kink at the double bond. Now this is oleic, or what's present a lot in olive oil. Now when you heat that to a certain temperature, and the general rule is 100 degrees centigrade, the molecule twists round. And as it twists round, you'll see that this hydrogen has been replaced around the other way. So this one has gone into this position. No change with the structure, just the position. Okay? And as it's twisted around, it's straightened out. And that's the key thing, that when you heat a vegetable oil or an unsaturated oil to a position which possibly was 100 degrees, let's say, it will form a trans as it's formed. So a trans is a straight chain. A cis, which is the better one, has the kink in it. Now, we have mono unsaturates, in other words, those that have one double bond. We have those that have two double bonds, those that have three double bonds, like gamma-linoleic acid. We have those that have four, those that have five, and the highest that the human body uses is those that have six, the hexanoic. So docosahexanoic acid, or DHA, is one of the highest ones that the body uses. But with six double bonds, you can imagine how easy it is to oxidize. So we know that DHA is present rich in fish, and that's why we found that fish oil oxidizes very quickly. It doesn't take that long before fish smells, and the smell is oxidized DHA. So it's the fatty acids in the fish going rancid, and that's why I suspect fish oil will never really take anybody above the zero of regeneration, because it's incorporating yet more rancid oils into the membranes. Again, pentanoic or eicopentanoic acid, EPA, again very vulnerable. Now, docosahexanoic is richest in the human body in the frontal cortex. So it's very rich. It forms half of this phospholipid structure in the frontal cortex, but in the eye, on the retina of the eye, it forms both parts to the phospholipids. So the richest part of the human body is actually the eye. So those people who eat eyes are a very good source of DHA. Not one I would ever really manage to do, I don't think, and keep it down. But the adrenals are rich as well. So adrenals are good. And I suspect possibly sweetbreads, which are pancreases, are quite good as well. The trouble is, unless you eat them raw, you're going to heat them, which means they'll go rancid. Okay? So anything basically which is exposed to the light and to oxygen will have gone rancid, okay, quite quickly.
The hippocampus would go for liver first, wouldn't it?
They eat the liver and drink the bile.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes, those are the things to go for first.
Yeah.
But you've got to be fresh. As soon as you slaughtered the animal, you cut the gallbladder out, drink the bile, and eat the liver. The birds will go for the eye and the bread, yeah. Okay. Yeah. So DHA is also in eggs. So there's a big comeback for eggs. You know, there's healthy eggs out there now, isn't there? You know, they hit the market, everybody says, oh, eggs, eggs, eggs. But there are now eggs, I realise that if you've got good free-range eggs, and particularly if you feed the chickens flaxseed, they will convert alpha-linolenic, which is omega-3 oil, into DHA. So DHA is rich in eggs. But they need to be free-range, and of course they need to be fed either grass or flax to do that. Now, here we see on the top a saturated fatty acid. So we see them like matchsticks. Now, when it says 18 and then .0, the 0 is the double bonds. So there are no double bonds in a saturated oil. Okay? And this is why you can't become oxidized with a saturated oil. And it's 18, which means it's got 18 carbons long. Okay? So that one happens to be stearic acid. Okay? Now, if we come down a little bit, we'll see that the properties of this is that it's called saturated, it has a melting point of 70, and there's no charge to it. When we come over here and we look at Let's look at this one. This is oleic acid with one double bond. Okay, so it's got one kink in there. It's got one double bond, so it's an 18-1, and it's in the 9th position from the methyl end, so it's called a W9 or omega-9 oil. So it's 18 carbons long. So that's oleic acid. And there, so we've got one double bond, 13 degrees centigrade. So this, when you put it in the fridge, tends to go solid, as you know, and it has one negative charge. Okay, so that's the cis form, the C. Now, when you heat the olive oil to 100 degrees plus for a period of time, particularly when you heat it, it becomes the same structure, but T for trans. And trans means it straightens out. So it goes back like a matchstick. Okay? So this is what happens. So it's unsaturated, one double bond. But look at the difference in the melting point. 44 degrees centigrade for a trans fat as opposed to 13 degrees. So if you eat a lot of trans fats, you literally become solid. Okay? If you eat trans fats unsaturated, you're taking in like a double dose of saturates. It's now generally more and more accepted that trans fats are probably one of the major causes involved with cardiovascular disease rather than animal fats. Because if you eat animal fats, you may put on fat and you may burn it, but you will not incorporate that into your arteries. Okay? But if you take trans fats, you will incorporate the trans fat into the unsaturated fatty position. Unfortunately, the cell membranes don't know the difference between the trans and the cis. They don't take up the fatty acid, they take up the phosphate group, which links in. So the phosphate is like the body, as we'll see the tadpole, with two tails. The position in the cell membrane doesn't worry about the two tails. So if you flood the body with trans fats, it'll take those up. Okay? So you think of all the junk that the kids eat, and he says, having had some crisps at lunchtime, okay, trans fats, donuts, cakes, anything where you've had heated vegetable oils, and particularly margarine and things, is all trans fats. Okay? So the way you get rid of trans fats, like oxidized, is to flood your body with new oils, and good ones for your type. Okay? So if we now imagine, an 18-2, like linoleic acid and linolenic acid with omega-3, and you heat those, you're going to get real big problems. So having sunflower seed oil, peanut oil as heated vegetable oils, in other words, taken out in hot extraction, are really bad. Okay? But those oils taken out with cold extraction or cold press below 100 degrees are wonderful oils. They've got all the nice fatty acids intact. But if you buy cheap, what is called ground nut oil, which is basically peanut oil, which is heat extracted, you've got a large number of trans fats in there, and they've also gone rancid. So because they've been exposed, so the way you get around rancidity is you put a smell in there, a fragrance. So all commercially produced vegetable oils are rancid, and they have a fragrance put in so you don't smell the difference. Yeah. Yes, it's peanut, and chip shops use the same oil time and time again. Okay, and I often tell the story, a patient of mine who had to make this computer program of how long it took a potato crisps to get across a big vat, and he said the vat was this sort of size to the ceiling there, to get from there to there, exactly time to float across so that it made a chip or crisp. This is a W company up in Midlands. Okay, so it was interesting. He worked this out there, and I said, well, that's an awful lot of oil in there. I said, must be a lot of black bits in the bottom, because deep fat frying continually leaves these acrylic bodies in the bottom. And I said, what do they do? And he said, oh, they filter it. And so I said, well, how long can you keep filtering, that sort of fat? He said, well, eventually, of course, they can't use it anymore. And I said, well, how do they dispose of it? And he said, you don't know, do you? So I said, no, I can imagine you have to bury it in the ground somewhere. He said, no, it goes to make margarine. So after that, I started seeing the old oil reclamation vans visiting the pubs and the cafes locally. Used to come to their pub in West Lavington. So what they do is they collect all the old oils, and you think, oh good, they're recycling, good, turning it into biofuels and things. Let's go into the margarine industry. Okay. So here's a phospholipid. So it's phospholipids that make up our cell membrane structure. So they're like a tadpole with two tails. And the tail is straight with a saturated oil because we see there's no double bonds. And with a monounsaturated we get one kink. With a double bond we get two kinks. Okay, so it's like a matchstick that you break once and break twice and so on. So the unsaturated gives the flexibility to the membrane, the fluidity to it. The saturate gives the rigidity. So you need a combination of both. So a cell should be a moving structure. It shouldn't be rigid, but at the same time you don't want it too fluidy. Okay? So this part here tends to be the bit which is hydrophobic because it's made of oils. So on the membrane we have the bodies here, the phosphate groups on the inside and the outside, with in the middle of the membrane we have a hydrophobic part which is basically oils. And these membranes are permeable to particular compounds. So the phosphate group or the body of the tadpole may be associated or attached to a number of compounds. Choline is the most abundant one in the human body. Inositol. So we met choline with the green people and blue, wasn't it? And inositol with the red people. Ethanolamine, serine, threonine, and there's a number of other phospholipid structures or groups which are attached here. But the phosphate group here, and that's the bit that attaches, and then you've got the C1 and the C2 position. One of them is unsaturated and one is saturated. So this is a typical cell membrane, as you can see, and across the cell membrane we have integrative proteins, those that go in the phospholipid structure there and travel right through. And these are for diffusion of molecules through the protein. So we get substances in to the cell here by passive transport. So the greater the concentration on the outside, the easier it is for them to cross over the phospholipid structure. We have those that travel through the protein, the integral protein, and here, and then we have those who go through the interprotein to come out of waste products, which is an active process that needs ATP. So to get waste products out of the body by active transport, we need to have energy in there in the first place. But this is more passive type of diffusion. So you can begin to see, particularly across the phospholipid structure, if these are hard and the wrong types of oils, particularly the trans or oxidized fats, we're going to have problems getting things across the membrane. And this is why we feel stiff, and this is the first symptom you get, is you get stiffness in the joints, stiffness in the muscles, you can't move in the right same amount of flexibility. So once you start taking the joint, and this is what Paul was describing yesterday, within a week or two of taking the right types of oils for you, your flexibility increases tremendously. In his case it was the pain around the hip, so it was anti-inflammatory, but there's also the overall flexibility. You'll find it would increase dramatically. Now the difference in brain cells or neuronal cells is that in many neurons the C1 position is taken by arachidonic acid, which is an omega-6 unsaturated, and by C2 by DHA. So in other words, you've got two unsaturated oils in the brain. The glial cells, which are like the glue around the cells to protect, the C1 is taken up by a saturate and the C2 by an unsaturated, so very similar to the rest of the body. The retina, both the C1 and the C2 positions, are DHA. So this is why the retina of the eye is considered to be the most specialized area in the body. And so the retina is like the screen here. And if this is nice and shiny, you'll get a blurred image on here. So one of the first things you do when people have got visual problems developing on their retina is you need to look at the oils that they're eating and get the right types of oils into the diet so they can make their fatty acids, particularly the DHA. So I'm going to skip through how the body makes the phospholipids.
It's really important for macular degeneration.
It's not so much the macular degeneration, it's more the intensity of the light, particularly ultraviolet, hitting and not being absorbed. So the violet end of the light, especially ultraviolet B, has to be absorbed. And the opposite of that, complementary, is the yellow-orange colour. And this is why the pigments in the macula are rich in lutein and zeaxanthin. Okay, so generally what we need is our old friends to make phospholipids. We need B5, we need B3, magnesium, zinc, folates, B12. So you can see that all the common nutrients and, of course, the oils are vital to making the phospholipid structures. Now, these eicosanoid compounds are derived largely from linoleic acid, or LA, and alpha-linolenic acid, which is an omega-3, and this is an omega-6. Natural sources of omega-3 are what we found is flax seed, is walnut, and is walnut, pumpkin, and flax. Hemp is a good source also of omega-3, good balanced one there. And providing you have the enzymes, which are called desaturating enzymes and elongating enzymes, we can make EPA and DHA. So if we go out there. So on the omega-6 side, we make gamma-linolenic acid, which is what's rich in evening primrose and borage and blackcurrant seed, dihomogammalinic, and then on here to prostaglandins 1, which is anti-inflammatory. Arachidonic acid can be made from dihomo, and this leads on to prostaglandins 2, which is pro-inflammatory. And the omega-3 oils here make prostaglandins 3, again, which is anti-inflammatory. So these tend to thin the blood. They tend to keep the blood flowing. These tend to be, generally anti-inflammatory, particularly for joint problems. And these are generally pro-inflammatory. This one. Which one do you want? This one?
No, the last one.
This one? Yeah. So this goes from EPA. So providing you can convert your flax or alpha-linolenic into EPA, you can then make up all your brain structures and so on. And we know that to do this, we have certain desaturating enzymes, and we also have elongating to make the fatty acid longer. So these enzymes are mostly B6, magnesium, and zinc dependent. They're all our usual ones here and here. If we have arachidonic acid making prostaglandins 2, we can go on here with the prostaglandins there, and they can go on to make prostacyclin, which is anti-inflammatory. And to do that, which helps as far as thin the blood when it gets too thick, is ginger, garlic, onions, and magnesium. So here, prostaglandins 2, which is pro-inflammatory and leads towards clotting of the blood. We need to break those clottings down to make them anti-inflammatory. So ginger is very good, and we know it's very good for at least 2 types of body types: garlic, onions, and magnesium, which is why they go in for injecting magnesium into people once they've had a heart attack as soon as you possibly can, or any thrombosis really. Magnesium is important to try and break up the clot. Now, gangliosides are specialized compound structures within the cell membranes, and they're made of basically from sphingoliomyelins, which are made from saturated oils like palmitic oil, and CoA, which is vitamin B5. And then these are added to the amino acid serine, and to do that we need B6 and manganese. And then they go on to make sphingosine. Sphingosine with a molecule of palmitic acid goes on to ceramides. You can see they're very complicated, need a lot of B6 in the process, to sphingoliomyelin. And these ceramides will then go on here to make gangliosides when they attach to different sugar molecules. And these ceramides here, when they have galactose added instead of glucose, go on to make sulfatides, which is rich in myelin. So these are the formation of the fatty acids that give myelin, which is the sheath around the neurons. Now, if we look at ganglioside M1, which is the more specific one in here, we need the sphingosines, we need a fatty acid, we need glucose and galactose, which we probably would never be short of, we need N-acetyluramic and galactosamine and galactose. So those sugars are present within our starches and our foods we get. But the big question is, which fatty acid? And these gangliosides are rich in receptor sites in the body to get information in and out. And this is the key bit, is which fatty acid to get the cell to work. And the books say that the fatty acid may be a stearate, palmitic, bohemic, or nigro-striatal, or an unsaturated. And I think this is where the unsaturated oils come in from the aging process of why the right types of fatty acids come in that we've been discovering. So gangliosides are rich in, gangliosides in myelin are low, but ganglioside GM1, ganglioside 1 prevails. Specific binding has been proven for many kinds of gangliosides. When administered parenterally, in other words by injection, these molecules circulate in the bloodstream continuously. They do not express toxicity. They pass through the blood-brain barrier, and they incorporate themselves into neuronal membranes. Okay, so these are really important here. So here's the structure. You can see all the sugar molecules with the fatty acid chains coming off. So ganglioside GM1, which has been mostly used parenterally for people with traffic accidents who've had spinal cord injuries, has been shown to restore dopaminergic neurons after damage to the nigro-striatal system, enhances uptake of dopamine and the activity of tyrosine hydroxylase, which makes dopamine from tyrosine. So it would appear the ganglioside itself helps to regenerate dopaminergic neurons and to stimulate the production of dopamine. Now this could be very useful in Parkinson's cases. If you get the right types of oils and you detoxify the person and you get the right types of oils into their system, and that's the question, which are the right types of oils to allow the production of ganglioside M1. Now why I know it's this is that the fatty acid kit that I made many years ago has ganglioside M1, 2, 3 and so on. And when I've tested it, it is always GM1 that shows up. And I can verify with patients who've got low dopamine, etc., that the right oil will help to stimulate this. This is how I know the work that we're doing with the 3 types of oils or 4 for the body type is probably more to do with ganglioside production than it is actually just the cell membranes on their own. Number 2, restores cholinergic neurons. These are the ones that produce acetylcholine, especially after damage to the hippocampus. So the hippocampus, we know, is very susceptible to stress, cortisol, high levels of cortisol, and this can inhibit our memory and enhances activity of choline acetyl transferase, which adds choline to acetyl COA to make acetylcholine. So that's good. So it helps our memory, in other words. Getting the right oils in helps our memory. Remember that dopamine is the upper. Serotonin is not an upper. Serotonin takes you from feeling the blues or low to normal. Okay, it's a modulator. So serotonin, if you have too much, is just as bad as too little. Okay, so you don't want to keep taking serotonin uptake inhibitors. So you take it up to a certain point. If you're low in serotonin, you want to bring it up. You don't want to go high. But dopamine is what happens when you win. So you can see that surge in the Olympics on Andy Murray's face. Okay, so that was that high level of dopamine. And Federer's face was low serotonin after the whitewash that we gave him. Wasn't that fantastic? Absolutely, what a wonderful match, you know. So proud of that boy now. And now, you know, he's beaten America as well. Time him. No, he's on a, but that's because he's on a roll. Is it Lendl, his trainer told him that, you know. He seemed to have lost that negativity. Yes. Never think, yeah. So number 3, it restores high-affinity uptake of choline in the cortex after injuries in the forebrain. Okay. Number 4, it protects serotonin and noradrenergic neurons from neurotoxin degeneration. So you're now beginning to see, it's to do with all the brain chemicals, you know, all the neurons which are producing these different brain chemicals. Diminishes cerebral edema and restores ionic balance after cerebral traumas. So cerebral edema is one of the biggest problems after people have had injuries, is swelling in there, and that edema needs to be got rid of. And one of the best ways of doing that is the sugar mannose. So mannose is an edema reliever after trauma to the brain. It stimulates regeneration of the optic nerve. This is gangliosides, remember. So what we're trying to do is how do we make a ganglioside? How do we optimize the making of ganglioside? And the answer is, let's get the right oils in there. And possibly restores melatonin uptake. Well, I think that's true because a lot of people have low melatonin and show to sleep problems. And when you put them on the right oil and the right regime, they start to sleep much better. So taking all those into consideration, I think that's one of the reasons why the oils are so vitally important into the regime with your patients. We know that oils or cell membrane structures are half of them in the body are saturated and half unsaturated, and the irony is the saturates can't become oxidized because there's no double bonds in there, but the unsaturates can. So it's the unsaturates you've got to replace in order to be able to put new oils into there and to get that nice gloss back into your skin. Now you can see that. So if you've got dry skin, dry patches on your skin, then you've probably got dryness in your cell membranes throughout the body. So have a look at the skin of a person, and the skin on the outside is a reflection of the skin of every cell in the body. Okay. Now,
Butter's all right.
butter's all right. Yeah.
As long as you have the balance between the unsaturated and saturated.
Yeah. Butter has plenty of unsaturated. It's got linoleic in it, so you know it's got good oils in it. But remember, cooking with butter does sort of brown the oils. They go rancid. Whereas you might want to use a more saturated fat for cooking with. Strangely enough, lard or dripping, and you know, is probably better than butter. But butter on bread is no problem. It's very good, especially ideally organic. Obviously, that goes without saying.
End of chapter 12.